taking questions. We are taking questions in the Q&A. It's nice to have all of you with us. And we will be answering a few of those if we can today. But if we cannot get to all of them, because we know this is a topic that's of great interest to you, we will be looking at those questions and then sending a document to you with some responses. So everyone who has attended this today will be receiving a document that answers many of the questions that were posed during this event today. A little bit of housekeeping reminders. This webinar is being recorded. It will be shared with all registered participants. As I just mentioned, use the Q&A feature. We are using the chat to share resources with you. We want this to be a helpful forum for you today, where you are receiving information, that practical information that you can use as you begin to think about your communication and building relationships with businesses. And we also will have a reflection session at some time post this global forum, where we will invite you in and we will have it be more of an open discussion where you can chat with each other, share ideas, and tell us about the ideas that you have. I'm sure all of you have wonderful information to share with us as well. The Global Forum is being recorded in full today, and then we will be sharing this out a couple of times in different time zones so that we can make sure that we reach everybody with this very important information. We're happy to have several hundred people online with us today. We know many more hundreds and perhaps thousands are going to be watching this global forum. We're very appreciative, again, that there is such a momentum moving forward to really ensure that we are working across all sectors, including the business community. So thank you so much. Making the business case for investment, neuroscience and economics, and that is what we are going to be discussing coming up. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Sarah Watson. Dr. Sarah Watson is the director of our Center for Business Champions. I can tell you that I have known Sarah for quite some time now, and I am really, really pleased that we are finally working together and working together on something that is so important and so vital and so critical at this particular moment in time. Sarah founded and was the national and then the global director of Ready Nation and Ready Nation International, designing and fundraising for and leading the joint effort for 14 years. Her hands-on work included personally persuading more than 1,000 executives to join campaigns for early childhood investments and supporting them to take action. She worked with local partners in Brazil, Australia, Romania, Uganda to create their own networks of business champions for early childhood. Sarah led 2 global business summits on early childhood and the first European Business Forum on early childhood for audiences of business executives. And I know that Sarah has shared her message of partnership between the business community and the early childhood development community around the world. And Sarah, lovely to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to be here to talk about my favorite subject with some of the most wonderful people in our field. So thank you, Diane, for that lovely introduction, and thrilled to have 3 wonderful people, panelists joining me. But before we go into their presentations, I just want to set the scene a little bit about how this differs from what the great data you've just heard. The purpose of the Center for Business Champions and the distinct role that we play is helping you create your own network of business champions to advance your goals. So we want to give you practical advice, experiences, examples, information, language, etc., that you can use to recruit business leaders. And we know that really key to engaging them is data that describes the problem and the solution in numbers and terms, language that is meaningful to business. It needs to be impacts on outcomes they care about, such as educational achievement, parental employment, monetary impacts on wages, taxes, public services, parental income, GDP, etc. And as Justin and Divya said, the ECD field is fortunate to have many types of studies that capture this data and present it in terms that are compelling to business. We've compiled a sampling of them, and they are in the Resource Hub at the Center for Business Champions website. And I think the link will be in the chat, and we'll be adding to that based on the studies that people have mentioned here, including some that people have added in the chat. So please feel free to send us your studies that you've used to engage the business community or make the economic case, and we would love to give everyone the benefit of what you have learned. I will say sometimes in my many years of talking about this subject across countries as diverse as China to Colombia to France to Australia, sometimes people are uncomfortable talking about children's outcomes in terms of economic outcomes. And it's true that we don't want to talk about children as though they are factory products. But we are fighting for funding against many other issues that demonstrate and talk about their economic impact all the time. So to win these fights, we need the type of compelling data that you will hear about today, presented in ways that get business leaders to act. We need data on the types of economic outcomes that are important to everyone across the business sector and the ECD sector. Educational achievement, parents working, etc. And so we are very fortunate today to have three wonderful experts who will each discuss a different type of report. And what's really important about this session is they are using that data now to recruit business leaders and compel them to use their resources, their reputation, their companies, their messaging, their money to support ECD. And I'll introduce them in a minute. But before we discuss economics, as Divya also mentioned, it's important to discuss the biology of early brain development, because investing in early childhood has a positive return because of the early brain development that many of you have heard about. So in my experience, making this pitch to the business community, this 1-2 presentation of early brain development in economics makes a compelling package. So I encourage you to think about how to package those two messages together when you're trying to engage the business community. So many of you are familiar with this early brain development. So we want to just show a short 2-minute video from a wonderful organization called the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard, called Experiences Build Brain Architecture. And during the break, we'll also show their 2 other short videos expanding on this topic. They are a groundbreaking organization. I encourage you to follow them. And we're really grateful that they've not only done the research, but created these compelling storytelling videos to explain this huge body of research. So let's show this video.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Great. And one of the important points I want to emphasize is that the research on the brain talks about not only the academic skills, but the social and emotional skills. And any business leader will tell you that the social and emotional skills, what they call executive functioning skills, management skills, leadership skills, are the most important for new or any employees. So talking about how the brain research helps people not only learn how to read and write and do numbers, but get along with people, follow directions, and persevere through difficult problems is very compelling to business leaders. So I want to turn now to our wonderful panelists, and their full bios are in the link, so I won't read all of their long, illustrious bios. But first, I've had the pleasure of working with Nancy Fishman for a long time now, 10, 15 years or so. Nancy succeeded me at Ready Nation. I'm so thrilled that we get to continue to work together. Ready Nation is a business leader network now of over 2,000 cross-sector executives that promotes public policies and programs that build a stronger workforce and economy. And so before that, Nancy worked at the Early Learning Investment Commission in Pennsylvania, where she recruited more business leaders to support early childhood policies in Pennsylvania. Sarah Hess is an associate director at the Royal Foundation, where she stewards the Royal Foundation Business Task Force, a new group of 8 businesses convened by the Princess of Wales. We're very excited to follow their progress. So delighted to see you kind of in person, Sarah, and to get to meet you. And then Emily Friedman is the head of business impact at the Global Business Coalition for Education. She's had leadership roles at WeWork and at the Clinton Global Initiative. And you've heard a little bit about that, but we're really thrilled to have Emily with her direct experience working with business on our panel today. So without further ado, and let me just say, fortunately we're running a little ahead of time, so I'm hoping we might have time for a question at the end from the audience. So reminder to post your questions for this panel in the Q&A. Let me turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you, Sarah. It is a pleasure to be here and be with you all and to get to continue to work with you on this critical issue. And thank you to your team that's handling the slides for me as well. Sarah already talked about Ready Nation and the work that we're doing, and we are thrilled that our business leader network understands the importance of early childhood more now than ever, especially as an economic and workforce development issue. Next slide. We wanted to better understand the economics of the lack of childcare, so we commissioned a study to learn more. The report that I'm going to talk about presents a 2022 study that's a redo of the study we did back in 2018. For both studies, we hired a survey firm to survey a nationally representative sample of more than 800 parents, both mothers and fathers of children under the age of 3. The survey asked parents questions about how their problems with childcare impacted their work lives across the 4 dimensions that you see here: productivity, time at work, work disruptions, and career pathways. Next. These next 4 slides present the questions we asked in the survey and the percentage of parents reporting the particular work problems caused by childcare challenges. For lower productivity, the questions focused on being late, leaving work early, missing a full or part day of work, or even being distracted at work. And you can see here the percentage of parents reporting each of those problems. They range from half to almost 2/3. Next. For time at work, we asked about work hours being reduced, either voluntarily or involuntarily, and changing from full-time to part-time work. You'll see that more than 1/3 of parents reported each of these problems. Next. For work disruptions, we asked about being reprimanded by a supervisor, having to quit a job, being let go or fired, or being demoted, again, because of childcare issues. Here we found that about 20 to 30% of parents reported these problems. Next, as we look at diminished career pathways, we see issues such as having to turn down a job or a promotion or additional education and training because of lack of childcare. We saw that more than 1/4 to more than 1/3 reporting these work issues. Next. So what did we do with all of this information? We hired an economist to take that survey data and model the economic impacts of work problems caused by these childcare challenges. Next. So what did we find? Well, when we first did this survey in 2018, we found an economic impact across the United States of more than $57 billion each year. When we redid the study in 2022, we learned that it had more than doubled to over $122 billion a year of lost revenue just because of the impact of lack of childcare for infants and toddlers. We believe this number then is an underestimate because $122 billion reflects parents talking about the impact who have kids under the age of 3 years old. Next. So these economic impacts can be broken down into 3 different categories: the impact on parents, employers, and taxpayers. Our economists determined that parents take a hit of $5,520 per working parent. So the total across all parents in the US under the age of 3 is $78 billion annually. Employers take a hit of $1,640 per working parent for a total of $23 billion a year. And there is also an impact on taxpayers. The impact on taxpayers is $1,470 per working parent for a total of $21 billion. And again, these are annual costs. Next. So how do these problems hurt the economy? I know this is a lot of text, so bear with me 1 second. I want to make sure you have this information at your disposal for future messaging. The costs to parents are in the form of lost wages currently due to lower productivity, less time in the workforce, and disruptions like quitting or being fired. However, parents also lose future income due to diminished career prospects since they have to cut back on working now. The employers, the companies, their costs result from lower productivity and extra expenses now related to rehiring and recruiting costs. Employers are also going to incur future costs due to lower workforce capital. And what's important for all of us to remember is that tax revenue is also lost across the board, both currently and in the future, due to parents' lower income and less consumption of taxable goods, as well as companies' lower business revenue. Next. So where does all this leave us? Based on all those challenges we just discussed, it's reasonable to project that this already enormous amount of annual economic damage continues to grow and has grown since 2022. We need policy action specifically focused on combating the childcare crisis. And we need the right messengers to help move policy. That's why we enlist the business leaders. This one report has been cited thousands of times by the media and policymakers from both parties when talking about the economic impact of the lack of childcare. We know that business leaders are most impactful when reaching out to policymakers and framing the issue in a way that makes sense to both of them. They put the argument in business terms: return on investment, recruitment, retention, workforce, etc. This report and the terms in this report allow that to happen. Next. It really is the way you say it. We know that the research exists, the research I just shared and other research that you all have seen and will see, to support investments in young children as a way to grow the economy and the workforce. For the business community to be involved, it's important that we message this in a way that highlights the impact on companies and on the broader economy. Once we have the research and messaging, it's important to combine that with impactful storytelling. Hearing from the business person that access to affordable childcare has improved recruitment and retention rates is something that other business leaders and policymakers will remember. Hearing a story about how a manufacturer is able to fully staff their production line once childcare becomes available in their community, and the economic benefits of doing so, is a story that people will remember. We make the greatest impact when we combine the data and research with a story, a real-life example from a business leader. Next. So 3 things to remember: the economic impact of the infant-toddler childcare crisis was $122 billion annually back in 2022. That number continues to rise. The crisis impacts not only parents, but also businesses and taxpayers. And it's important that we use messaging that resonates with the business community to get their attention, and then to allow them to get the attention of decision makers. Next, I am happy to partner with any of you in your efforts to discuss this research and our approach in a way that makes the most sense for you and your efforts moving forward. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Nancy. I will also add that a number of states in the United States, plus the city of the District of Columbia, have done their own study similar to what Nancy has done on a national level. And many of them are available on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce website. We'll send you that link. And what's amazing is that they find results that are very comparable across the country in very different settings, states that have been a little better about supporting childcare and states that are absolutely terrible about supporting childcare, which shows that it's just a persistent problem. And some of the specific outcomes that Nancy found that form the basis of these numbers also make compelling stories. when I was helping the District of Columbia, the city of Washington, D.C., do its study, we found that about 20% of people had been fired. That is such a dramatic emotional outcome that people understand how traumatic that is to parents, both financially and emotionally. And so that made another very compelling story, just to echo what Nancy said. So I want to transition to Sarah Hess with the UK Task Force for Business, and we are really thrilled to have you. Thank you so much.
Hello, lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Nancy. That was wonderful. I'm just going to share my screen now and hope that this all works as neatly as it should. 1 second. I'm so sorry, it doesn't seem to be letting me share it. Could you possibly share my slides for me? Or is that not going to work?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you so much. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. I've got so much to learn from everyone today. Good afternoon from London, and I'm really, it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm Sarah Hess. I'm Associate Director at the Royal Foundation, and I'm really here to tell you about our work with the Business Task Force. But just quickly, I will introduce the Royal Foundation first of all. The Royal Foundation exists to pioneer the Prince and Princess of Wales's work addressing society's biggest challenges. That includes homelessness, mental health, conservation, and societal connection. We are mostly focused on the UK. The area the foundation focuses on are quite wide-ranging and complex, but they have one key thing in common. To create the transformative change that's needed, we really need to tackle each of these. We need to create a healthier and happier and more nurturing society. We all know here that it's our relationships, surroundings, and experiences in the first 5 years that play such a huge role in shaping who we are and the type of society and economy that we want to create. And so it's our collective opportunity and our approach to early childhood that can so shape our society. And it's why the Princess of Wales is so passionate about this topic, why she set up the Centre for Early Childhood, which sits within the Royal Foundation and has done since 2021. And I guess as our part of our kind of unique position in the Royal Foundation, we really feel we have a responsibility to bring alongside of the whole of society. And of course, business plays an enormous part when we think about society. So if you could just pop onto the next slide, that would be great. So this is a little bit introduction, and maybe just we'll go straight onto the next slide because I've got a lot to say. And so what I thought I would like to talk about here is in 2023, the Princess of Wales convened the Royal Foundation Business Task Force. And that was when the Princess came together and sat with 8 CEOs in NatWest's London headquarters and asked a question which started a really powerful conversation. How and why should businesses prioritise early childhood? And this meeting here, pictured with the Princess talking to businesses, really set in motion a whole stream of events, which has led to something which we feel is really powerful that I'd like to talk to you about today. We've done a huge amount of work exploring how businesses can have real impact. And yeah, I'll be sharing some learnings today, but also be listening to lots of learnings as well. If you go on to the next slide, that would be super. So I'm not going to dwell on these stats because other people today have already presented beautifully, and this is stuff that I think we all can agree on. These are obviously UK stats, but some of them are global. And this understanding of brain development is so vital, and it really demonstrates how providing the best care for the youngest people in our society delivers huge impact. Again, I'm not going to talk about the kind of the neurons made. We've seen the brilliant Harvard video, which was fantastic to see. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And then some specific UK stats here, which are pretty stark and don't make for happy reading, where we see over 1/3 of children under 5 are living in poverty, 1 in 5 parents struggling to provide sufficient food for their children, and nearly 1/3 of children starting school without achieving a good level of development. And as I say, the UK stats, but I'm sure we'll see similar ones from around the world. But I think what Nancy just talked about is really important. We know this kind of scientific evidence, we know it's here, but it's really our job, we feel, to make a kind of bridge between this science community and the business community. And I think, you know, someone we all quote, James Heckman, did a really good job of this, showing the kind of ROI on those US interventions, demonstrating the highest rates of return from investments which targeted the lowest age brackets. And that's something that we see kind of as a bridge. So if you could just pop onto the next slide, that we see the task force really showing to be able to deliver a bridge between the scientific community, whose evidence is so unequivocal, making the case for early childhood. And I think most of us here, you know, understand it so well, it can almost be frustrating. But we do have to create that bridge, whether it's with our language, with the communications, how we package up this argument, because we know the business community has the resources, reach, and influence, which can be such a driving force for positive change. So the Royal Foundation brought together these businesses around that table, which I just showed you. And if you could go to the next slide, I can give you a bit more detail about who they are. Hopefully some businesses here that you will recognize, deliberately very big corporations, many global, and they do encompass a range of sectors. It's not perfect, but we really feel it's a good start, and really we, as I said, charge them with taking the scientific argument and making a business case. And it was they were very quick to realize this wasn't going to be quite as straightforward as they thought. But where we realized the power could lie is in our business case, it's written by business for business. And handily enough, we have Deloitte on our business task force, as you can see there. And they sort of took charge, as is their bread and butter, in writing the report for us, all around the kind of business case for prioritizing early childhood. And what was really important in that is that the task force were very aware of the huge challenges businesses are facing and the many competing priorities. So we really used the report to lay out those incentives. And if you go to the next slide, we can kind of talk about the number. And I think you do need that number, and Nancy's already shown that. Our number was the 45.5 billion, which is the amount that could be generated for the UK economy generally. I'm sorry for the weird spacing in my slides that's popped up. It always happens, doesn't it? But how that is manifested in the kind of three parts. And whilst Nancy's talked about the kind of childcare aspect, which is such a powerful argument, we deliberately went a little bit broader than that. So put the 45.5 billion number comes from these three separate sources or economic arguments. And if you take the next slide, I'll just talk through them briefly, because I think it's quite important to see that we have got these three elements, and there's a reason for that, which I'll come on to talk a little bit more about. But so 12.2 billion from equipping people with improved social and emotional skills in early childhood, I think we all know there's a kind of the challenge around social and emotional skills already. That's quite early childhood language, and putting that into the sort of language that I think it was Sarah talked about, kind of leadership skills, agency. These are what businesses really need and understand. But this particular element of our 45.5 billion is about the non-cognitive skills and how improving on those can impact our GDP if we were to kind of get them to the level of other countries. By the way, if you want the full economic argument, please do look at the report. Go to the next slide, please. The second element is the 16.1 billion for reducing the need to spend on public funds on remedial steps for adverse childhood experiences. And these are experiences that, again, we know the costs which come further downstream if we don't get the early childhood right, whether that's social care, mental health, crime and antisocial behaviour, a really compelling piece that makes up this return to the economy. And the third element, if you just go to the next slide, is more about the stuff that Nancy was just talking about, looking at the huge barriers that working parents are facing, childcare being obviously an enormous element of that, and representing the economic impact of and underemployment for parents and caregivers under 5 in this case. So those three elements were really important in making up that big number, that 45.5 billion. And you need that hook in the same way that I know I've definitely quoted Nancy's report as well, that's the piece that you know that can travel far and have that impact. If you go to the next slide, The other elements that you need, and actually our Deloitte report was in 3 parts, really. That economic case, so vital, but then secondly, the kind of the frameworks, how can businesses have an impact? And thirdly, the case studies, the showing of action and inspiring other people to realize that they can act, or the business leaders particularly. So what we talked about is how businesses can have an impact, and that's in these kind of 3 areas: as employers, as providers of goods and services, and as influential members of communities and wider society. And this is actually a really important place to start with a lot of businesses that I've been talking to in the year since we published the report. Reason for that, and I think it's why, you know, our report, I think, can sit alongside other brilliant reports out there. What we've noticed is that a lot of businesses are very nervous to talk as employers. They think this isn't for them. If they're a small business, they say, well, oh, we can't possibly provide the policies that Aviva or NatWest or Deloitte can provide. But what we want to say to them is that actually every business can do its part. And yes, you might not be able to have the kind of policies that we have some of our big employers here in the UK, where both men and women are getting 6 months full pay for a new baby. But what you can do is review what you've got and create a culture which certainly prioritises early childhood, even if you can't afford the full gamut of initiatives that some of the task force members have taken on. And looking at goods and services, what other touch points do you have with early childhood? And really critically, and again, this has been said before, but businesses are such an important and loud voice within local community, but of course within wider society and with government, of course, too. So if you go to the next slide, I've already lost track of my timing, so apologies if I'm running a little bit over, but I'm going to go through this very quickly. What we laid out was our 5 opportunities for impact. So thinking about the way businesses have touch points with early childhood, these are the 5 areas that we know and where we've been encouraging businesses to think around what they can do. I'm just going to jump through these in the next slide to bring them to life a little bit with actual illustrations. So on the first slide, the next slide, Lego, strengthening social and emotional skills. We've talked a little bit about that earlier and how that can have real returns, the importance of building a workforce who is fit for the workplace of tomorrow, which, to be frank, none of us really knows what it's going to look like. Lego have been doing brilliant work with nurseries, providing kits and training around social and emotional skills, which have been going into early year settings. Next slide, just jump through these. Aviva, pioneering policies for parents and caregivers. As I mentioned, that kind of 6 months full pay for both parents at birth is really critical when we kind of look at equality in the workplace. And there's some fascinating data, which I don't have time to talk about around that. Next slide, please. If we look to Iceland, they're a grocery store across the UK. They looked at not their policies, not what their goods are, but actually what their store environment can look like to better welcome and support young families. So they have these wonderful posters in stores which really encourage parents, carers to talk to their young kids, and they're at a child height. They're nice and low, and you see kids kind of crouch around them. It's really wonderful to see. Next slide. NatWest, again, a totally different approach. They looked at their partners. Who are they supporting? They work with hundreds of nurseries in a lending capacity. So what they did is look at how can they better support businesses in the early years. And let's be frank, certainly in the UK, these businesses are really struggling. And what they did is look at their lending criteria and also the kind of toolkits and support that they can provide to their partners in the early years space. And then one more to go, so number 5, which is around securing the necessities. IKEA have been a fantastic member of our task force. What we were able to do is connect them with a network of baby banks here in the UK, the Baby Bank Alliance, and they've worked really closely together to come up with some really interesting initiatives to support baby banks around local stores. But they also launched a wonderful range, children's range, just before Christmas, where £1 of every purchase went towards the Baby Bank Alliance, which did a fabulous job, of course, raising money, but also of sorry, the lights have just gone off, so I'm just going to wave myself around, get the lights back on. Also, of raising awareness of baby banks and what they mean, and reducing some of the stigma around them too. So really powerful partnership that we've been able to support. But what I'm trying to say with all those 5 examples is that there are different ways businesses can approach how they think about early childhood and how they think about prioritizing it and making more of it, and really speaking about it in the wider context of their work as a business. So I think I've got one more slide, which is the takeaways, which I think nicely overlap with some of the things that have already been said. We have to make the business case. We have to do that in business language. And one thing that we are all kind of very cognizant of is that we don't have enough businesses in the room talking about this at any point, and that's definitely how we see part of our role, to kind of bring more businesses into the room, part of this conversation that we've been having for a long time. And this has to be framed in language and the world of business to make sense of it. It has to have that ROI. And I think what Sarah was saying earlier about, sometimes we're a bit nervous to we're not businesses. I think you said children are not factories, and of course they're not. But we do need to make sure that we make our case in a really compelling way in environments where we're not used to always talking in that same language. And the third point that we've learned, and this is obviously very relevant to kind of our context and the way that we work, but offering a breadth of opportunities to act, we've found is a really good way of opening the door to different businesses who at first might feel like, oh, this isn't for us. We don't feel like we're need to be part of this conversation. We're never going to be able to offer massive benefits to our employees. But actually, what we really hope to do, and where we're finding actually the most fruitful conversations with new businesses and businesses who haven't engaged, is to really say there's so much you can do here. It doesn't have to be huge, and it can look like a number of different things. So thank you. That was all I wanted to talk around today. I hope I might get the opportunity to answer questions. I'm talking more about some of these things on a panel later as well.
Great. I'm so excited. We'll get a few more minutes with you, Sarah. And I just wanted to give a quick illustration of Sarah's point about the language of business. I was working with a group in the US that wants to attract business, and they were talking about the amount of childcare slots or classrooms or in their community, and they talked about capacity and need. And I said, those are very social sector terms, and they feel either emotional or like jargon to the business community. And the exact same translation into a business framing would be supply and demand. That's what they all learned, basic economics. And it means the exact same thing that you in the early childhood sector want to convey. It's just a term that resonates with business. So we can provide lots more examples of that later on. So thank you, Sarah. That was a wonderful tour of what you've been doing. I want to turn now to Emily Friedman. And again, I think we'll be having a little bit of time for questions for this panel. So feel free to put them in the Q&A panel. Emily, thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thanks to our panelists, Sarah and Nancy. I've just been listening and learning from you both and everyone who came first, and actually just reassessing the use of my slides, given that we've seen so many wonderful sort of statistics and figures. And I think I'm going to pivot on the fly and actually just not even use my deck, because a lot of the slides there have some of the same stats that we've seen before, and I'll just dig a little deeper into the work that I was invited here to talk about today. So I'm Emily Friedman. I'm the head of business impact at the Global Business Coalition for Education. And thanks to Childhood Education International for holding this important event today. And, to my colleagues, as I mentioned, who have given great presentations already. For those who are unfamiliar, the Global Business Coalition for Education is a movement of businesses who are dedicated to ending the global education crisis and unleashing the potential of the next generation. And we do this through projects, campaigns, our active networks of businesses, policymakers, youth, NGO, and others. And our goal is to ensure that all young people, excuse me, have the best start in life. So that's a focus on the early years, a safe place to learn, and skills for the future. Some of you may have seen, excuse me, our CEO, Justin Van Fleet, speak earlier this morning. GBC Education is part of a larger global children's charity called Their World, based out of the UK. And together we are running the Act for Early Years campaign, which is encouraging governments, international donors, businesses, philanthropists, and others to make financial commitments to benefit the youngest learners across the globe. You can learn more at actforearlyyears.org if that's at all of interest. I'm not going to go really deeply into the campaign today, but our work feeds into the overall campaign. So I'm excited to be with you here today to talk about, a topic that's important to everyone on the call. Obviously, it's critically important given the current kind of global environment we all find ourselves in, and where resources for education in general are becoming more limited. As the other panelists have mentioned, it's really important then to be able to demonstrate why investment in the early years is not only the right thing for businesses to do, but also beneficial to business and to the greater global economy. So we've heard some really great statistics around the challenges that we're facing when it comes to the early childhood development crisis and why businesses should care. And we were hearing this too as an organization. And a few years ago, we heard from some members of our business community that they were finding increased sort of internal pressure to align their social and environmental efforts with concrete business goals. So some of you might be familiar with terminology around ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And that was a language that resonated within the business community to align what they were doing in these sort of social sector policies and programs with the metrics and frameworks that their business was being held to. And so sort of a caveat and a note that while many companies are sort of retreating in name from language like using ESG and other kind of terminologies in the social space, we still hear that these frameworks are necessary for making the business case internally and for making the case for funding that drive budgets across the company, so particularly in corporate social responsibility, HR, social impact, et cetera. So what we did was we conducted a study and wrote the business case for investment in the early years, and I'll put the link to the report in the chat. And the idea behind the report was to help practitioners within a company make the case within their own company to support early childhood education, and also for an external audience to kind of understand how we're using this terminology and why it's important. The report focuses on, or uses a framework within, so I'll back up for a second. So within ESG, there are a number of frameworks that different companies either are required to report out on or hold themselves to make it easier to demonstrate the work that they're doing from a social perspective and how that ties to business goals. And the framework that we used for the report was the World Economic Forum Stakeholder Capitalism Framework. And it's sort of a fancy way of demonstrating how if you break down the work that you're doing into certain categories, you can align that with principles that the companies are already reporting out on for their own business needs. And so actually, I'll say one other thing on this is that this is around 200 companies or so currently use sorry,
Have you back?
can you
Yeah, we have.
hear me? Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you. Thanks,
Oh,
Emma.
sorry. I'm at the office and the internet cut out at the office, so I'll leave that there for what it's worth. But anyway, as I was saying, and I hope I can get to where I was in my notes without too much trouble. Okay, I believe where I cut out was talking about ESG metrics and frameworks and what companies use to report out on. And we wanted to examine specifically how investment in the early years can contribute both to social goals and business goals. And when we used the World Economic Forum stakeholder capitalism themes of people, prosperity, planet, and principles of governance, which again, we can share, we were able to categorize the different ways that a company might engage in early childhood education under these buckets so that companies could easily report out with what they're already doing by using these metrics. So for example, under people, this primarily refers to a company's own workforce. And the argument here is less focused. We heard this a bit from Sarah. It's less focused on supporting young children as it is in supporting the caregivers and parents who are taking care of their young children. So what companies can do within this bucket, they can adapt their policies to include adequate parental leave. They can support access to affordable quality childcare and preschools. They could provide quality early childcare centers on site if they have the means to do so. There are a number of different actions, and I'll go through a few case studies at the end as well to demonstrate that companies are doing these things within these particular buckets. Under prosperity, this is focused largely on a company's social impact or CSR efforts. So while the first bucket is focused on sort of workforce and employees, the second is focused on what a company can do with their own resources to support early childhood initiatives out in the wild. So companies can invest in social and community projects that enable early childhood development. And this is where I would say a lot of the arguments in the cases that we're using on early childhood brain development between the ages of 0 and 5, creating sort of these lifelong skills that are the most sought after by the private sector later in life, and making that connection and showing how investment in these types of programs would be the most beneficial to them later down the line. They can focus on research and development and product innovation to support early childhood education. We know that a number of tech companies are doing this in their own efforts to kind of create products and services that might be useful to young people in their own education. Planet, we know that there's a lot of companies shifted focus on ESG away from, or placed less of an emphasis on the social side and more of an emphasis on the environmental side. Again, all of this is in flux. It's never exactly static. But there is a case to be made for tying a child's well-being in their environment and supporting policies that mitigate exposure to harmful pollutants and chemicals in water and the environment to brain development, and then tying that back into what a company is already reporting out on in terms of their environmental impact. So what a company could do here is when they report out on environmental practices, they can consider prioritizing the air pollutants, quantifying the positive impacts of reducing those pollutants for children, same with water pollutants, investments being made in environmentally friendly business practices, et cetera. And then finally, the fourth bucket is principles of governance. So this is looking at making sure all of the businesses and people within a supply chain are being protected by policies that a headquarter operation can put into place. And those should include young children. And again, these are measures that a company can report out on. So they can talk about how they're establishing a human rights-based approach throughout their supply chain for the caregiver and the child. They can publish annual data on business contributions to early childhood development, and they can ensure that the voices of children and families are heard in the stakeholder engagement process. So again, these are 4 buckets that are concrete places that companies can report out on what they're doing in the early years that tie to metrics that they're being held to, many within their own ESG frameworks. And I wanted to mention there's one, I'm cognizant of time. I think I have a little bit of time, Sarah mentioned, but someone flag me down if I'm rambling for too long.
You're doing fine, Emily, thanks.
Okay,
Great.
thanks. There was another argument that actually wasn't in the deck that I'm not sharing anyway, that we didn't touch on in the report, but I just wanted to mention here because as an organization, we've talked to probably some folks on the line about this and just wanted to flag. There's an argument to be made along the lines of job creation for young people, which is a topic that many businesses care about. We hear a lot about how can businesses support young people and their skills training and their employment prospects. So bear with me here for making this connection, but there's a 2020 World Bank assessment that estimates that there's a global shortfall of 43 million childcare workers. So we're around the world, we are lacking that many childcare workers. And there's also a global youth skills and employment crisis where 13% of young people globally are out of the workforce. So there's really an opportunity here to correct what is essentially a market failure and create economic incentives so that we could create essentially if we're talking supply and demand, a pool of young people entering the workforce who are trained in early years care, support, education, and think about creating business opportunities for those young people entering the workforce so that they can then care for the next generation. So it's an interesting sort of way to kind of approach this two crises with one kind of overall overarching goal in mind. I know that Sarah touched a lot already on the types of programs that companies are employing to kind of attack these issues head on. I have Lego as a feature here I was going to mention, and Sarah mentioned it, which is fantastic. I'll just mention two others and kind of talk about where they fit into the framework. So Patagonia is a company that we featured in the study, and they're doing a lot in general on kind of ESG, social impact, and environmental work. So they are, I would call them almost low-hanging fruit. And there are companies that you can approach who are already, it's baked into their ethos to care about issues that are important to society. So I think those are, if people are thinking about the types of companies to approach, the companies that already understand why this is important is maybe the best to consider first. But Patagonia made a significant commitment to environmental conservation on its 50th anniversary, and it created the Patagonia Purpose Trust, which is its own nonprofit. And they recognized that the role of play is critical to children and to society. And so what they did was they created initiatives that promote environmental awareness and well-being around young people. So kind of attacking the issue from a planet perspective. They advocate for cleaner air quality, for unstructured play. They highlight the benefits of connecting children with nature. And then under the kind of the people category, they have a long history of providing on-site early childhood education centers for their employees. They have a dedicated center at its headquarters. And through rigorous evaluations, Patagonia has demonstrated a strong return on investment for its childcare initiatives. So that includes employee retention and engagement, and contributed to gender parity within its employee workforce base. And then I'll just highlight one other company who we highlight in the report, the Generali Group. And they really they sort of focused in on that prosperity bucket, which is the kind of traditional corporate social responsibility or social impact work. They established the Human Safety Net, which is a nonprofit organization that was formed by the Generali Group, and they've contributed significant funding and mobilized resources from third parties to participate in early childhood development programs in Italy and Indonesia that actually integrate financial literacy modules into parenting programs. So they recognize the challenges faced by vulnerable families with managing their financing, equipping young parents with essential financial knowledge, and then parenting skills and financial education, kind of trying to make a wraparound service for the families that are on the receiving end of the program that they have spearheaded. I'm going to pause there. I'll just highlight our key takeaways, and I can share some of the links that I've referenced. But the key takeaways just from our side here are investment in the early years it's not only the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do for business and for how they think about their whole overarching business sort of ESG framework as well. The private sector can take different approaches by investing in key areas, and you can look at different frameworks. Again, we looked at one in particular, which focused on people, prosperity, planet, and principles of governance, but there are others as well. And that GBC Education in their world are mobilizing probably everyone in the room, governments, international donors, businesses, NGOs, philanthropies, to make commitments to the world's youngest learners. And that's an active campaign that anyone can join, actforearlyyears.org. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Emily. As part of one of the most preeminent business education bridging organizations in the world, we're really happy to have your insights. And we have a few minutes that we can go to some questions that people have posted in the chat. But I wanted to, one of them is going to be on the 2-generational model for ECE. Emily mentioned that, but I know, Nancy, your scope of work covers not just early childhood, but that broader age spectrum that includes young parents. So I'm going to invite any of you to comment on that. But one thing that I wanted to say is that the basic skills that the Center for Business Champions aims to help you build apply whether you're working with business to support ECD or support older children. The idea that we need to use data, that we need to use language that's compelling to business, that there's a difference in business culture that's important to understand. We'll talk about that a little later. All of those apply whether your goals are more ECD services or better services to help children move through the educational system or to get employed once they're through their educational goals. So let me just see if anybody wants to, of our 3 panelists, want to comment on the idea of supporting a 2-generational model for ECE, where children are supported to access ECE alongside some form of support to their families.
I'd love to take a stab at it. One of the specific ways that Ready Nation does that in our efforts is when we think about young parents, parents who are pursuing a degree or credential of value and unable to get the education and training they need because they lack childcare, finding ways to strengthen that relationship as well. So the young child is in high quality care, learning, and the parent is able to get the education training that they need in order to be able to get a job and support their family. So that's a very specific example, but it's one that we found where we can use the childcare information, but talk not just about the young children, but about an educational opportunity that parents could benefit from.
Right. Thank you. Sarah, did you want to?
I was just going to build on that a little bit, that certainly we see when we talk about employers looking after employees, giving employees time to spend with their children is part of that. And we see some of the more kind of innovative employees providing time off to go and see school play, to spend those moments and recognize the importance of those moments of togetherness, particularly around kind of social and emotional development. So not a direct answer to the question really, but just I think that the kind of culture that an employer can create can still have an impact on that kind of intergenerational piece.
Great. There's a question in here that I'm going to broaden a little bit to make it broadly applicable, but the question here is, what are some strategies I can use to build effective partnerships with businesses in the US to invest in ECE in Haiti? And I'll just broaden that. So do you have suggestions for building partnerships with businesses that are maybe in countries that are a little more well off, a little higher income countries, to encourage them to invest in countries that have fewer resources? Any suggestions?
I can hop in. So I would say that probably the best way to approach this is to not, I'll rephrase it. The best way to approach it is to look at companies who have, whether it's for their supply chain, through their supply chain, or through the number of operations they have around the world, or regional kind of interest in a particular area, that they might be focused on that region. So first is to understand how and why a company would have an interest, because probably unfortunately for all of us, a business isn't going to contribute to a region that it doesn't have a particular business interest in. So I think I would just, because it's a regional question, I would approach it with a regional focus. And I think there are a lot of companies that work in Latin America and the Caribbean that are headquartered in perhaps countries that are more economically advanced in that region as well, with an interest within their own region, who might be more understanding of the issues that are happening there and why you have a particular focus. And that would be a good in. So I guess my first point is just to say that a company won't inherently care about a particular region or program that you have somewhere. There has to be sort of the reason why they would care. So again, is it a supply chain issue where they have communities who are producing products or services for them in that region, and they want to make sure it's a stable environment, for instance? Then you can kind of go with the childcare angle. So it might feel a little bit indirect, and it might feel a little disingenuous, to be honest, when you're kind of trying to find the bridge. But that would be sort of my first piece of advice. And I'm sure both Sarah and Nancy, and both Sarahs, would have ideas to build on that as well.
Yeah, that's essentially what I would say. So thank you, Emily. Let me go to another question. Do we have data on increased business productivity when childcare programs are on site, or when employers support childcare for their employees? I know of studies that we can post that show the increase in women's employment, and women in particular, women's employment generally. I think it's a little harder to tie childcare to the specific business, but I think that one of the challenges, but it's a surmountable challenge in engaging business, is to help them see the impacts to their business, but also the impacts to the larger economic community, which do help them when you have more women in particular that are available to work. Anybody want to answer and have a more answer to that? Okay. The last thing I'll just ask, because I know this has been part of the Ready Nation messaging, is have businesses expressed any interest in developing future consumers as well as employees? How is that part of your messaging? People who can buy your goods and services.
I can talk to that. We certainly try and make that part of our messaging. But as we all know with early childhood, it's balancing that kind of longer term ROI and that shorter term ROI. And Emily's put it really well, that we have to understand the business interests, and not all businesses can operate on that 20-year time frame that we would like them to. So I think how we always frame it is of you're buying kind of productivity and returns for today, but also building a better economy for tomorrow as well. And always having both, I think, makes it, kind of, again, I use the word breadth a lot today, but I think really does mean that you're kind of making that really compelling argument in a way that businesses can understand, because that we have the same conversations when we have it with government. It's very hard when you're on those kind of quick cycles, and businesses that have that shorter runway or timeline that they're looking to. So yes, I think it's a fantastic argument and right and compelling, but it requires that longer term mindset.
One of the more short-term ways that I have talked about this is when you raise the salaries of people who are providing early education services, they then are able to buy more things. And at least in the US, there are studies that show that that type of employee tends to buy more local goods and services. They pay their rent, they buy more groceries, et cetera. And so investing in higher incomes for people who spend locally not only improves their ability to buy goods and services, but it obviously supports the businesses around them. So, and that's a quicker return.
Yeah,
than
great.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you. Thank you for your work. I'm learning from you. I hope that all the people that we are going to be working with on engaging their own business community can get great inspiration as well as practical ideas and examples from you. And again, we'll be sending out all of these links to the participants after the session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yvette to do our transition. Yvette, apologies. I think I need to do the takeaways, which I will do while you're getting ready to do the transition. So apologies. So investing in the early years pays dividends. It's not only the right thing to do, it is the economically efficient and productive thing to do. The business case is clear. We have lots of great evidence, both on a global level, as well as some examples of studies that you could potentially replicate in your countries. Private sector leadership makes a difference in terms of being able to support early childhood through their advocacy for public investments as well as their private actions. Working together in partnership between ECD leaders and business leaders is very important. We'll talk about that a little bit as we start to get into some more of the how to build these partnerships with business. And these long-term benefits, I think, in addition to the short-term benefits, can really drive the transformation of how we support young children to become the employees and also the customers and the neighbors and the residents that we all want in our countries. So with that, I'll call in Yvette to take us on to the next part of the agenda.
Thank you, Sarah. My video now. Thank you so much, Sarah, and all of our presenters during part one. We've just had such a rich discussion, really making that business case for investing in early childhood. What we have to look forward to after a break, about a 15-minute break, is part two, where we will be starting off with building partnerships with businesses, what ECD leaders need to know. Then the second part of part two is putting the S in ESG, prioritizing children in social responsibility. Then the third part of part two will be business ECD partnerships in action, success stories. So we're looking forward to more wonderful presenters, more wonderful conversation, more helpful tips for all of you to be able to build strong relationships between the two sectors. We will see you at the top of the hour here Eastern, that's 12 o'clock noon. Until then.
Yvette, can we remind folks that we'll be playing some really cool videos?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Yep, we'll be playing a few videos. You heard the research referenced by Dr. Heckman. We will be showing a couple of videos from their center, and then we will also be presenting a video that really breaks down what ESG is, particularly for those of us who may be novices to the space or emerging in the space. And so that will be happening during the break. You're welcome to stay on. Again, we'll be starting our regular programming at the top of the hour at noon.
We do have effective programs that have been proven to work, and we can ask, what is the rate of return on the investment? So if we compute the rate of return which is exactly what any good entrepreneur will look at, what any good society should look at. The rate of return has been estimated to be between 7 to 10% per annum, which is much higher than the rate of return on stocks in the American economy between 1945 and 2008. Typically, you'll see the discussion, on the one hand, you get this policy, and the other hand, you get this benefit, or sometimes you can improve productivity, but you do so reducing equality in the society. This policy tackles inequality. That's its goal. At the same time, it promotes productivity. It has a very high rate of return, and I would defy other competitor policies in the public arena to show rates of return as high.
We always say to ourselves, well, we must fund the prisons, and we must fund police, and we must fund standard K through 12 education, because those have somehow crossed the line into the things that a society cannot function without. The question is, can we function without a fully developed, socially and emotionally talented workforce? It's no different from if we don't invest in roads and bridges. Eventually they'll collapse.
Investing in early childhood, giving the proper and the best experiences in that time frame, the benefits you reap for many, many years to come. And as a business leader, that investment is critical to develop the talent and the skills that we need as a company to succeed as well.
Too much of our political discourse these days devolves into one group bashing another group. One group is derided as hard-hearted and the other group is derided as soft-headed. And what we need is more hard-headed but soft-hearted political discussion and also action. Action in this case means making smart strategic investments in our future competitiveness as a country. And early childhood is perhaps the strongest investment that we could make on just a raw return on investment basis.
As a business person, I'm all about looking at how can I invest and get the biggest return on limited resources. I think by using Dr. Hickman's analyses, it's very easy to conclude that the best investment a person can have interested in a quality education is early on in that child's life, because I think it takes a lot less, a lot fewer resources to be impactful in from 0 to 3 than trying to change the system of a high schooler already that's contemplating dropping out. I mean, building those early social emotional skills, we know can really prepare kids to succeed in kindergarten, and by building that confidence and love of learning, that carries through the rest of their education.
Now, it turns out that if a kid has had very successful training and is very coached and strong in terms of cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills, that the rate of return for a college degree for a very able kid is of the order of 20% a year. Very high rates of return. So we're not saying that the returns to schooling are 0. It's just saying that we get the greatest return in the early years because it makes possible harvesting later returns. So that's the knowledge that has to be invested. Unfortunately, the way American public policy works, especially for disadvantaged kids, is we put a lot of our emphasis at the end of life when the problems emerge.
An ESG program documents a company's impact on the environment and on different stakeholders, as well as its approach to corporate governance. It also assesses potential business risks and opportunities in ESG's 3 pillars. Each pillar focuses on various issues or factors. Environmental factors include energy consumption, water usage, greenhouse gas emissions, and overall carbon footprint, waste management, air and water pollution, deforestation, biodiversity loss, and adaptation to climate change. Social factors involve a company's treatment of employees, supply chain workers, customers, community members, and other groups of people. These factors include fair pay and living wages, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, workplace health and safety, fair treatment of customers and suppliers, responsible sourcing, oversight of supply chain partners, community engagement, charitable donations, and social advocacy. Governance involves internal management practices, policies, and controls. Governance factors include the composition of senior management and the board of directors, executive compensation, financial transparency, regulatory compliance, risk management, data privacy policies, ethical business practices, and rules on corruption, bribery, conflicts of interest, and political lobbying. ESG is closely related to two other concepts that go beyond standard profit and loss calculations: business sustainability and corporate social responsibility, or CSR. There are clear differences among the three concepts, though. Business sustainability focuses more broadly on positioning a company for ongoing success through responsible management practices and business strategies. CSR is a general framework for taking business actions that have societal benefits. By comparison, ESG is a formalized strategy that includes measurable goals and processes for tracking, managing, and publicly reporting on them. ESG programs can contribute to business sustainability efforts and ensure there's a commitment to and accountability for responsible and ethical practices in companies. For example, an initiative could aim to create more responsible and sustainable supply chains, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, implement climate adaptation measures, or adopt a circular economy model for reusing product components and materials. These moves can pay long-term dividends, but there are also more immediate reasons for companies to invest in ESG strategies. Competitive advantages over business rivals. Companies with successful ESG programs can improve their market position and brand strength compared with competitors. More attractive to ESG-focused investors. ESG investing has become a significant part of capital markets. Trillions of dollars in assets are being managed in the US alone using ESG and sustainable investment approaches. Better financial performance. ESG initiatives can reduce energy bills, operating costs, and other expenses while potentially driving higher sales. Increased customer loyalty. Companies can more easily attract and retain customers who consider ESG in buying decisions. In a survey of IT professionals by TechTarget's Enterprise Strategy Group division, for example, 70% of the respondents said they think their company would pay more than a 5% price premium for products from IT vendors with strong ESG practices. And more sustainable and adaptable business operations. It's also easier for companies to adapt to changes in regulatory and legal requirements, plus the effects of climate change, depletion of natural resources, and other environmental issues. In addition, ESG initiatives can increase employee engagement, make it easier to hire and retain workers, reduce business risks, and improve the standing of companies in the communities where they have operations.